Happy 2021. Hello and welcome to episode 151 of Michael and Ivanka's Grand Podcast, a weekly podcast where we figure out what we think about stuff. My name's Michael Forrest.
And I'm Ivanka Majic.
And this week we're going to talk about stories in all their forms, because what is this podcast if not our story told week by week? I'm sure someone's, if you want to listen back through, I'm sure you can chart our very interesting lives in sequence. But no, we're going to talk about the nature of storytelling, that kind of thing, and different ways to tell it and why it's important. I do quite a lot of trying to tell stories in data at the moment, which is kind of tricky, and I think it's, there's some challenges to that. But what you saw a Rushkoff episode?
Yeah, I was listening to a Rushkoff episode, and he and I should have looked up who it was with.
I think I have the window.
But in conclusion, they concluded that telling stories is really important. Like his Rushkoff story of going to see the billionaires who wanted to know how to control the guards of their bunkers after the inevitable collapse of society, I think brings to life that you can you can do all those visualizations of how rich Bezos is don't really do as much as that story did, I think, even though those visualizations are very cool. I also still tell stories for a living in some ways, because as a user researcher, if you cannot bring the story of the user's experience to life, then you've missed a trick, and there's lots of ways of doing that. So,
and it's how we remember things is in terms of stories. So that's like how it works, isn't it? Compresses it into our memory through the story structure. So how do you tell a good story? Yeah, that's the episode. So let's not waste any more time.
I'm well.
2021.
I'm well. I am well. I've crocheted a whole blanket.
Yes.
I mean, come on. Talk about achievements. That was exciting and surprisingly simple, to be honest, but impressive in its results. And I am a little bit homesick for Brighton. I'm very much wanting to see my mother, which obviously pandemics prevent proper relationships at the moment. But otherwise, things are good. Work-wise, 2021 has started with a bit of a bang. So I'm working on an interesting project, very short, very intensive, and I've also started yet another Instagram account, which I can neglect shortly, which is in Croatian, because I thought, as I'm here, I should, I suppose, just document a bit the things that I do with the aim of not leaving a massive footprint on the earth. So far I've photographed a couple of my beach cleanups, and I've put a photo up of my seedlings. Broccoli's already through, everyone will be delighted to hear. And obviously I put up a picture of my fantastic crocheted blanket.
Of course. So why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't I?
Why wouldn't I? How are you, Michael?
I'm okay. I'm all right. Thank you very much. It's a new year, so I've just been sort of trying to figure out my priorities, mostly trying to figure out what I want to focus on. Because last year was like this. I was just trying to finish the new Changes website, which everything takes too long. But I did get that up. So goodtohear.co.uk/changes has a brand new website, and it's a lot clearer what the value proposition of the app is, I think. And it's also something that my designer collaborator can start marketing and kind of creating stuff for. So that's progress. But like for me, I'm sort of finally getting around to assembling some sort of like analytics. I was like, what do I actually want to know? What do I care about? What numbers do I want to know about? And like just collecting them all by hand from different places. And then obviously like doing anything like that, I've been putting it off because it takes ages to figure out and make it look nice and like figure out what you want it to be. But now I've sort of and I've made done good so that I can say whether something's making me happy or not, or whether I'm enjoying a task or not. And then I'm going to start auditing the stuff, just figure out which stuff I hate, and like be a bit more active about just like culling or delegating stuff that I just hate doing, because why am I doing the stuff I hate doing? And sometimes you gotta, but some stuff I'm sure I just want to get a better picture of, because I have this like, you kind of start on something and it's like, it's too hard, I hate this, and then you get into the flow and you're enjoying it for like 3 hours. But like I want to know what that balance is, and whether some projects are worse or some platforms. I got myself, since I spend a lot of time on my computer, I'm gonna order myself a new monitor, a proper 4K, like a big one. And I thought, I'm not gonna buy a new one. I'm gonna go to eBay and I'm gonna get a used one, because and I found one that the guy said he'd bought it like a month ago, and his computer couldn't handle it, so he's reselling it. So it's going to be like 150 quid cheaper than buying it new. So I was like, okay, let's do it. So I kind of I didn't look too much, but I sort of sent over the money, and it all seemed to go through fine. And then like a couple of days later, I'm like, why is eBay's got some real usability problems? It's weird. Like, why is there's no pictures on this? I can't seem to get to the messages we sent and stuff. And then like a couple of days later, I realized like, well, he's deleted his account. Oh, his account was active for like the day before I ordered it, and then deleted the next day. And I'm like, oh no, I've just been scammed. Like looking at, going, why would you do that? But I was like, I'm sure my alarms would have gone off, because it seemed like a human. It seemed like we were having a conversation that made sense. It didn't strike me as dodgy. But yeah, I started resigning myself to it not coming, and then I got a thing saying that it was expected to be delivered on Wednesday, and then I got it on Monday, and it was fine, and there was nothing to worry about. So now I've got like a nice big huge monitor that I can work on. But yeah.
So what, is the guy just set up an account to sell his monitor, and then
it's weird. Well, I thought, well, maybe it's that, but who would do that? Why? I mean, if it's the whole point of I felt a bit stupid for not, because you're supposed to the whole point is you check the star ratings and see if they seem trustworthy based on long-term usage of the platform. And here's me just like buying something off someone that's just got clearly some sort of dodgy account. Or maybe it's better that I didn't notice that, because I might not have my new monitor by now.
True. I found a website the other day where you can buy stuff that's been returned.
Right, yeah.
So you know how buying online, and apparently that's one of a massive source of waste, particularly like, I don't know, there's obviously Amazon's on the list of naughties that don't try and resell, or it's too expensive to deal with returns.
Right.
But with buying remotely, you have a right to return anything. So I bought a dehydrator.
Oh.
For one that had allegedly been returned.
Right.
But I really can't. So I got it for less money, and I thought one should support these kind of initiatives. But I can't identify that it has been used before or anything. But so I've got lots of dehydrated lemons now. But that's another story.
I like. I've been liking the idea of a dehydrator, just sort of making our own snacks. Seems like a fun thing. Just cut up an apple, stick it in the dehydrator. Seems like a fun thing.
Well, we've got 3 lemon trees in the garden, and that is way more lemons than you could possibly ever eat during lemon season.
What do you use a dehydrated lemon for?
Lemon tea.
Right. So okay, I see.
Or you
video
actually,
viewers could see the lemon in question. Just support us on Patreon.
The rehydrated lemon. They're also quite nice to nibble on.
Yeah, okay.
Even because even without sugar or anything, the child seems to go through them at quite a pace.
Okay. I like a tangy snack. I will say, the only other thing I'll say is we've started hitting a drought with TV, to the point what I don't like with TV is when the only thing you're watching is 55-minute, hour-long episodes. And it's you can't exist entirely on hour-long episodes. You need some 30 minutes, you need some 20 minutes. Otherwise, it's just too much of a commitment sometimes. Or films, it's we need that kind of midway duration thing just to sort of...
You need a snack.
Yeah, you need a snack. Stories.
So have you found any new telly, or are you just telling us that you're in a drought?
It's just hard. Like stuff comes through. Like we watched I Will Destroy You. I May Destroy You. It was very good. And another thing, like sort of looking at the BBC HBO collaborations, Industry was quite good, and that's on iPlayer. So it's sort of like young people, their lives, how things are going, it's all right.
We talking of good stories and telly movie combos. We watched The Joker. Joker. Sorry, Joker.
Yeah.
Which, talking about stories very well told, I'd say that's a very well put. That is a story.
Yeah, it's not trying to do, especially when you think about superhero films. It's sort of like, this is an uncomplicated, like, ABC. It's almost like a sort of 70s film where just one thing happened, and that was the whole film. I quite like that. Taxi Driver, I think, was a big influence on that film.
I was a little bit perplexed because I've watched a few really nice stories recently. I watched a film called Yesterday, which was delightful and feel-goody. And I watched a thing called Blinded by the Light, which is another just a delightful feel-good story, both British things. Yesterday, anyway, and then because I'm sort of more in the mood, there's enough going on, enough storming of capitals and stuff, but we watched Joker as well in the mix. And one of the reasons I'd been putting it off was because there was all this, the bits and pieces that I picked up on about it was like the trauma of going to watch it, and like and I was like, it's not, it is, I think, a very well timed story as well. It's a massive, it's a if you think about what happens to a person whose childhood is destroyed, it's got a lot in it. Really,
I would, it was surprising that it was good.
It was, and very well acted, I have to say.
Well, Mark Maron has been sort of anti-superhero films for ages, and then when he sort of decided to do this superhero film, he was like, well, I gotta do it because it's Robert De Niro and but yeah, it wasn't, it was more of in the sort of Logan vein than the Batman versus Superman vein, thankfully. But stories, I would say, and I think I already said it, but I think I see stories as kind of how we compress data as human beings, as how we internalize wisdom. So you just even think back to like parables, Jesus, the Bible. It's all like, here's a little story that you remember, and then you can refer to the story as a whole, which is actually like a really powerful way of being able to reference something quite complex, like the Good Samaritan. Remember the Good Samaritan, and then it's like, that happened and that happened and that happened. So it's a human thing. I don't know if animals do stories or if I think it's just a human thing.
I don't know. I can't imagine. I mean, they do like there's animal. I don't know if demonstrating is the same thing, because there's like, stories of orca grandmothers teaching orca grandchildren how to catch seals on the beach and stuff like that. But I don't think that's storytelling.
Like developing,
I think that's showing
muscle memory skills, isn't it? Yeah, I mean,
but I don't know.
Can you have a story without language? I guess, but then is the language that animals have on? And I don't know why I've pushed us straight into an area that neither of us.
So we don't know anything.
I don't know anything about this. I just had the thought. Listeners,
I was just going to say stuff.
I'll ask my dad. He'll probably know. He'd know this. He'd have an answer.
I mean, I think they do in as much as they can act out, like which dogs, they're trying to tell you things, so they're like,
true. I saw a bird and it was flying
it's
around.
over here.
It's in there. That's sort of like a story. But do you want to go into what inspired you? What about that Eisler's Ryan Eisler Ryan on Team Human? Link in the description.
They were talking about.
I'm sorry.
They were talking about changing society basically, and how all of the structures we have thus far are really domination. So even whether it's left, right, up, down, pink, purple, they're all about somebody dominating over somebody else, and and fundamentally, and we're not, we need to sort of meet each other, we need to talk more. The easiest way to do it is through stories. So just trivially, or not trivially, that's wrong word, but look, in passing, you put up a thing to say X thousand million children are hungry. Do you get any money? No, you don't. You put up a picture of a starving child, or you have a video in your, NSPCC ad that has a very touching narrative, but no data points, and that speaks to us directly, and it brings it to life, and it's a much easier thing to relate to than a number. Yeah. And sort of end of that episode, they were basically talking about the need to bring different types of stories to life. So when, Kate Raworth talks in Donut Economics about, and many other people talk about this, but she talks about the sort of the value to society that raising a child brings, that somebody who is a stay-at-home parent who isn't necessarily being paid, there is an economic value to their contribution to society for raising a child, for teaching it how to behave, to teaching it how to go to the loo. But that's not recognised, and that's in part because the people that have been telling all the stories to date have been powerful white men, or have been for a very long time. But also, so there is an important job that we all have to tell the stories of the world how we want it to be, almost, or to say, here's a different way. I remember speaking to somebody whose parents had taken him to live in France for maybe a year or so when he was a kid, and he said he was always helped in later life simply by knowing that his British experience was not the only way things could be, and that they could be different, and that this is just a way and not the only way, or not particularly the right way. It's just a way. So yeah, I think that's what made me think.
And that sort of makes me think about something like The West Wing, which I really love because it sort of presents a sort of larger than life, sort of almost idealized, but not idealized, but like this is how things could be version of like American politics that obviously couldn't be further from what's currently happening. And it's not like that. In order to make sort of good, like, people with values, in order to make that an interesting story, they have to have like these very big challenges thrown at them as well, and there's always something to figure out, or something like complicated. But that's one way of telling stories, is to sort of like think about how do we want the world to be, and sort of provide an exemplar of that. But also, like, it's also very important to, like, there's sort of gritty realism is also a popular type of storytelling. Like, let's show someone's miserable experience, because that story needs to be told in order to create empathy for, those members of society and things like that. And so, yeah, there's I like I wouldn't say that like an ideal, or like here's a vision of how things could be, is necessarily a sort of uplift. Well, it is uplifting, because it lifts people up out of like, here's what we've got now and it's rubbish, into potentially thinking about, well, here's how things could be. But then that gets complicated, because then you're like, well, this is how things should be, and then you get angry that they're not. And then, but yeah, I just like how The West Wing presented the politics, and that was all I was saying there.
I'll watch The West Wing.
Well,
but I think it's. But those stories, yes, I absolutely think, the stories of reading books, watching films, watching telly, listening, all of those things, looking at painting, all of these, that kind of the role of art in telling stories, all different art forms, but also just telling each other what we do. Oh, I didn't know you could do that. I didn't know you could use dehydrated lemons for making lemon. You know what I mean? Like, it's like being the difference between your Instagram being a curated version of what you wish your life was, or those vignettes of like, oh, look, I've laid out the table for lunch and it looks perfect. I'm going to make it look like we always eat like this, or whatever it might be. And just having it so that it's got like some of the things that maybe people don't realise that you do, or don't realise can be done. One of the things about telling each other stories once a week for 150 previous times, like there's loads of things that come up in that storytelling that then you learn, I think. Well, which is nice.
Weird how every social media platform has now adopted the language, like Instagram stories, WhatsApp stories, all the different, like WhatsApp's got it, has it now? But like I know, it sort of came from Snapchat, but I've never really understood how a short portrait-oriented video with stickers on it or like some filter constitutes a story in any conventional sense. And I don't really click on them, but I think it's something that the youngsters like a lot more, don't they? But I don't really understand it, and on what level is it a story or not, unless you use it to tell a story. But is that how people are using it?
I don't know. I really, when I think of stories, until you mentioned them, I hadn't thought of Instagram stories. Even though I mentioned Instagram, I hadn't really thought of those. It's like, I really
at least the
hijacking
of the term friend and the subsequent complete dilution of the of the value of that term by Facebook and similar is like at least that sort of is a friend, but I don't. It's like such a tenuous use of such a good word or a good concept to such a sort of random thing. Like I just need to like invent some random bit of technology and just apply some really like core noun to it and say, no, this is now what bus is. No, this is a prayer.
but I think the point that of stories, the point that the conclusion of the podcast was more. That's why I think Ben's write-up, our friend Ben, his write-up of his experience of helping his school during a pandemic is helping the school with remote learning, and the way he's written it up is a really good and important story, because it's like he's not telling anyone to do the same as he did. He's simply
sharing what he's done and like just sharing what he's done, and like and that's
I did this thing,
and that's something he actually like taught me when he was my manager back in 10-15 years ago. He was like, it was all about like it's not enough just to do the work, you've also got to tell people that you've done the work in a way that engages them, and that's something I've always sort of brought forward. And it's actually like I try now. My Fridays are mostly devoted to kind of capturing my story, like what I've done this week, one way or another. So I do this podcast, and I also do like a little short YouTube video where I got to show the work that I've done. And the idea is like, I don't know if each one of those videos necessarily constitutes a story in itself. Maybe it does. There will be stories in there sometimes, like, oh, I had this problem and I overcame it like this. But I'm sort of hoping that in future, when I'll have the material to be able to tell a bigger story by pulling together bits of footage from those smaller stories. I mean, it's just something I'm thinking about. But yeah, it's like I have to explicitly set aside time in order to do that, and I have to sort of believe that that's valuable on some level, even if it's just for me to sort of keep a record of those. And also, like when you're telling the story, it helps you kind of remember it and kind of store your experiences a bit better, maybe.
Yeah. I think it's.
I'm going to mention, I'm sorry about all the noise on my side of this recording. They're doing some work on this building, and also just loud person just started cackling in the next room as well. So it's. I
haven't heard it.
I don't. Yeah, there's. Listen. Yeah, we've got some stuff like that going on. So I'm just. It's hard to get rid of it all. But if I'm talking, there may be stuff going on in the background.
this being our first conversation of the year as well, it's sort of, I've come into it with this idea of wanting to be better at telling the stories of the things that I do that I would like more people to do. And, and not in a preachy way, I don't think, but maybe a little bit of What's wrong with preaching about something you think is important?
You need to do it in parables,
A quick side note on that. We have not raised our child in any sort of a Christian context, and she's engaged with Christmas this year, and they have been told the story of Christmas at nursery. So she comes home, it's a Croatian nursery. First of all, she used the word, she's like, "Oh mummy, we learnt all about baby Jesus," because she didn't know the English word. And he's got a mummy called Mary and this fairy called Angela came down. That's how she'd remembered it.
It's a good way of thinking about it.
So
away I did pretensions.
I did take her to. We did watch a CBeebies nativity just to sort of, counterbalance it a little bit, because I suppose it's as much cultural education as anything else. But yes, so I think preaching. It's useful then when it came up for us to have a chat about what people believe in and all that malarkey. But I think, like you say, parables are useful, but
funny parables are the best. Funny parables. That's what we should aim for. But
funny is good.
Are you familiar? I've mentioned it before, but Dan Harmon's story circle way of approaching a story, and how every sort of when he's the creator of Rick and Morty and Community, and something he's sort of churned out a lot of very good TV in his time, and he's got this story circle, which is a way of looking at a story, and it's sort of so just to try and quickly summarize it, it's like you have your sort of status quo, your protagonist in a situation that is maybe suboptimal, then there's this sort of call to arms or whatever. There's some instigating event that means they're forced to change or go on a journey, basically the hero's journey. Then there's this process of basically failing and then learning and then overcoming that challenge, and then sort of returning home, but as a new person with new sort of a new perspective or new skills or whatever it is. So and he sort of says every story sort of more or less follows this structure. So that's sort of how I tend to think about it. So and it's just that 3-act Hollywood thing. You'll have the sort of the act 1 is establishing what's going on. Act 2 is the sort of the crisis, and there's a thing to that. And then act 3 is the sort of the climax and resolution and subsequent new normal kind of thing. So there's a lot of writing on this. So,
yeah. But actually saying out loud the things, I think is the only way we're going to create some sort of change.
Story circle. I was thinking my monitor isn't very big and I'm often having to move windows around. So I sent some money to someone to buy a new monitor, but then their account was deleted and I was scared. And then I realised that I was and then I didn't do anything and it came and it was fine. I needed to there needed to be some way in which I was overcoming the
the challenge.
I got eBay to investigate, and they sent. I don't know.
I just didn't
figure out how to make it.
You weren't that bothered, really, were you? You're just oh, damn it, I've been had.
Yeah, it was fine. The conspiracy theories and the whole QAnon thing, Pizzagate and all that kind of thing is sort of examples of how stories spread not on the basis of the truth, but on the basis of how exciting the story is. And it's there's a paedophile ring under a pizza restaurant and Hillary Clinton is involved, is the ringmaster of it, is impossible to forget because it's so insane. And there's that sort of subset of the population that are just going to embrace that as truth. I guess I don't know if that's the same subset of the world that can't doesn't realize that films aren't real, like that sort of take, you know, fiction as truth. One of the problems we have is, like, if we care about truth, is making up stories that can compete with the salaciousness of the false stories that the followers of the idiots will be telling themselves and sharing. And
I mean, it's so hard to compete.
Yeah.
With if you've got to use reality as your basis, it can be very hard to compete in the storytelling. But then maybe you just don't need to explain all the details. You know, I think there's that whole never let the truth get in the way of a good story, or, you know, and I think that's the bits, pick the bits of your story that get your point across rather than all that. And that is because I've got this book, like, about, like, screenplays and writing stories, and that's like one of the things you do is you sort of assemble all the things you'd like to see. So what the people that don't care about truth get to do is go, well, what's all the most exciting stuff? Nazis, paedophile. I'm saying all this. I'm going to get picked up by some algorithm on Apple, and our podcast is going to disappear. But, like, they just get to choose whatever random government conspiracy that goes all the way to the top, like all the favourite parts of the most interesting stories, and assemble them into one story. But we have to sort of go, okay, well, we've got this and this and this, and we've got to turn that into a story somehow. It is. I guess I'm just reiterating that it is a bit of a losing battle if people don't have that. You know, how do you tell people? How do you get through to someone that doesn't understand the difference between a made-up nonsense story and the truth? I don't know. Well, this is one of the subtopics of our podcast for the last 151 episodes has been, how do we make the world better? And how do we retain hope? And how do we fix things? And I think one thing that we mustn't lose sight of, any of us, it doesn't matter how small you think your audience is or isn't, is to just keep sharing things that are worth hearing, or that you think are worth hearing, because those people talking about the pizza paedophile ring, they're not sitting there wondering about whether it's worth telling the story. You know, that's getting shared. It's getting shared.
Yeah. Yeah.
And amplified. So, you know, amplified what you want to get heard.
Yeah, and your little story is, you never know until you tell it if it's something that is actually happening to other people as well. Like, you may realise by sort of just talking about what's going on inside your own brain, like, oh, other people connect with that and are having the same experience, and you just thought it was you, and it can take away some loneliness sometimes even. Yeah,
I was part of my research interviews I'm doing this week. So somebody was telling me the story of one of her children. He was never really wanted to join in with group activities. He'd go to football club, do the close-up stuff, but not then join in. And she just thought he was losing interest, or because he was very little, 3-ish. And then nursery noticed that when they were doing far away story time, that his eyes were going a bit cross-eyed. And so they recommended, took to the doctor, eye test, blah. Pair of specs later, he's a reformed character because he can see.
Right.
But, you know, like, I wouldn't... And she was saying, I just kept thinking it was his personality. He was a bit sensitive to noise or crowds. He was a bit shy. And I was like, I would have thought exactly the same thing. But now that you've told me the story of your child, I will now... You know, I can add another symptom. This can happen. I must now look... You know, this is something I can look out for. Yeah. But, you know, until somebody tells you... And, I mean, it's an educational story, but it's a story that you can remember... And we sort of,
in one way, we sort of look down at, like, anecdotal evidence of things, and we do have a tendency to sort of weigh, anecdotal evidence will outweigh statistics, for example, by a lot. So people are more scared of very, very rare events that they heard on a news story once than they are of the very, very common dangers that we all face. And that's the sort of problem with it. But that's more of a problem with statistics, I suppose. And I suppose that's a segue into what I did want to bring up. And it may be a bit boring and maybe a bit fruitless, but one thing I am focused on is telling stories with data and turning large data sets into something comprehensible through sort of visual storytelling. And that's that. And I mean, you said like the Bezos thing wasn't as compelling as another story, but like, I mean, I find that the most compelling thing myself is just
that
seeing
data.
the size of that and scrolling and going, like, this is beyond, like, this helps me, because the number is such an important element of the Jeff Bezos story. It's like the defining feature of him. And now bloody, Musk is now the richest man in the world. Sorry, Mark. Tech Trump, as we can start to think of him, Elon Musk. It's really hard to. It is hard to. I wouldn't call that. The story with that is I scrolled for bloody ages. Right, so it's not a very good story. It's just like, wow, how long do you think I scrolled for? I don't know, 10 seconds? No, it's about 5 minutes. Wow.
But it's not. But that's the thing. The visualization is not the same. I as soon as I mentioned that, I knew it was. I was like, no, actually, that does bring it to life. But it requires. There's a sort of overhead required to even transmitting that story. That you know, the Rushkoff thing you can say wherever you are. You can say it out loud. You can say it in multiple languages. You can say it. It's much more accessible, and I think the accessibility and inclusion element is actually quite the because that's the power of a verbally transmitted story.
And I suppose it's graphic novel versus an actual novel, like a normal a text novel. I think like you can get it's so much deeper, like a text thing. And I actually think now that you say that, like what the graphics bring to a story is, I'm not sure a picture does tell 1,000 words. I think a picture almost sort of slows down the story in a way to what you would get if you were reading it. So maybe we just need to not conflate visual storytelling with like written or language-based storytelling. It's nice, but you sort of then have to share the image, which is just a different thing.
I think also it's not such a telling a story, repeating a story of something is also quite a sociable activity. In a way, even if it's a blog post, I don't know. I'll debate that. But the actual sitting around, telling each other things, telling stories is I've got a child that doesn't read yet, and she will get a lot from a book that just has pictures, and she'll tell me stuff, and she looks at the pictures in more detail than I do because I'm reading her the story. So she'll go, oh, but look here, why is this person doing this? I was like, I don't know, I wasn't really looking, to be honest. But I think, so it's a different experience.
You can put a lot in it, and obviously like this Hollywood, film screenplays, the whole show don't tell thing. Like if you can show something in action, you shouldn't be describing it. But and a story that I have that sort of reinforces this in a weird way is, I remember I commissioned this music video a few years back for Swimming into Darkness is the song. And I remember having this call where they pitched me the story. So this like New York kind of little animation production company, and they'd written the story, and it's all told visually in the finished animation because it's a music video. But when they just told me what happens in the story, like it brought a tear to my eye, and I was like, okay, that's cool. And it's like, it should work just told as a story, even if subsequently you turn it into something that's more visual or more like data. So you need to sort of start from that story I think telling the story in words can have the same power and is a lot more efficient in some ways. But then I don't know what you take from, like, why not I just tell people a story of the music video instead of getting the music video made? It's because it doesn't exist until the story doesn't exist until the video is made. following the
But
script.
I think in your example, the story is the sort of. But I think all of design is a story, and it's just bringing it to life in the same the right medium or the right context for how it's going to be consumed. Like maybe it's the whole thing of like coming up with the presentation narrative and then creating the artifacts to illustrate the presentation, or imagining the user journey through your product and then designing the interface that supports that. If you haven't got a sort of story, for lack of a better word, in your head of how someone's going to use this thing, then it's never going to be good.
Yeah, and I suppose it goes in. You've got to match people's mindset at each stage of the story. So the Good Samaritan, like, oh yeah, we all know that there's an out group that we don't like. Okay, these Samaritans, we hate them, and then we know that there's the people that we do like, and then we see, and then so we know where we are, and then the person that was supposed to be a good person walked past the hungry person that was in trouble. What? That's surprising. Okay. And then you're sort of like guiding someone through. So you could just say, treat strangers as you should treat, but it's not going to stick, because you need to guide people through step by step in a way that can't happen if you just sort of give them the conclusion.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, one of the things that, the last few years of projects that I'm on, you do a load of user research, and people want to know what magic button they're going to change on their thing that's going to make everything brilliant and everyone going to use it. And it's like, you've not set their expectations, you've not told them the story, you've not taken them on a journey. Like, people don't go out of nowhere suddenly start, I don't know, behaving differently. And so it's like that taking people on that journey is really important in loads of contexts, and particularly when you want to teach them something or get them to internalize it.
And we can have the illusion that we forget the process of going through the story as well. So someone can just be like, yeah, it's just greed, isn't it? Human greed. And it's like, I mean, yes. Like, I think for someone that doesn't understand that, you have to take them through that journey, and they have to watch, I don't know, insert film about greed here, and like show all the different ways that that's a harmful thing or a problem. Or I think it's tempting for us at the moment on the left to be sort of going capitalism, and like that's the end of it. But really, like, we need to be like fleshing out each individual experience and story and like we can tie it back into that theme, and that's like theme is an important part of telling a story. But you can't just like, I think if it can be easy to mistake to forget to tell the story because you already understand the theme, you already understand the conclusion.
I think that's one of the power of the Bible parables, like the Good Samaritan, is that many of us have heard the same story, but when you go, oh yeah, capitalism, we've probably all read a completely different story about capitalism, and so that fall into a few different groups. But and so therefore, when you go, capitalism, greed, everyone goes, their points of reference are completely different. The stories that they've read, the conclusions in their head, and that's what makes it trickier. And you think you're agreeing,
right? Yeah, that could be.
Which is like that is the
or you think you're disagreeing, like that's just as much, I'd say. There's an irreconcilable thing. No, only because the way you think about it, you're just using different words to talk about the same underlying problem. I have this with, sometimes you'll get someone that always has a tendency to put things in such like stark or like weirdly unpleasant or sort of slightly racist sounding terms, and where I sort of agree with their conclusion, but I just think the way they've got to that is really messed up. And I think they're sort of fixating on one aspect of something that's sort of maybe missing the point of
I don't know, but finding common ground. Simple stories is a nice way to start.
And it's weird because you sort of feel like TV feels like a weirdly frivolous thing. TV and cinema sort of feel like, how important can that be? But like, what's more important than here are the most expensive stories in the world being created, so at least like a good chunk of the population has seen this particular thing. And I think they are a glue that God knows what the situation would be if you didn't have the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
And on that
On
note,
that bombshell. Thanks for listening. If you like the podcast, you can go to grandpodcast.com and see more about it and subscribe in the app that you're using to listen to it. If you really like the podcast, or if you want to actually see us talking, see us faces, see Ivanka moving back as I say something and I'm like, why is she moving back like that? I'm not sure. See me looking distracted because I'm actually taking a note or just checking that the recording's working. You can see all that. But you have to be a patron, which means that you give us like $1 a month, and then you get the video a day early, and you get to see the podcast in video and a day early. There you go. Imagine that. Where can people find you otherwise on the internet?
people can find me at Ivanka. At the moment, that's a bit tricky because my notifications are inundated by my second role as Ivanka Space Trump. Yes. But soon, though I have to say that might soon be over. In some ways, I hope it isn't. I hope that so many legal questions are being asked that there is pain yet to come, but of a much more useful variety.
We're recording this as of like yesterday. The night before last was the riots, the Capitol storming. This morning I woke up to Trump has actually conceded. Blah blah. But he needs impeaching and kicking out. But there's no point us talking about it because we're like 4 days behind what's happening, so we don't even know. But just it's a shame Pence didn't just jump onto the just 25th Amendment thing, but maybe he has. Yay! Or whatever. Does it really? It's like this. I think the main thing, can we just stop him from pardoning himself? Seems to be the main challenge right now. Because it's pretty impossible to, like, even when Trump is scared enough to try and not apologise, but to actually like try and be a human about something, he's in trouble.
Yeah, he's really in trouble.
Anyway, that's where we are. That's the time we are. But yeah, hopefully we'll see you next week. Bye. Thanks for listening. Bye. Tell us your stories.